In a galaxy far beyond the reach of human maps, where stars shimmered like scattered diamonds and planets spun in orbits unknown to Earth's astronomers, there existed a realm that defied all logic. The planet Xyraxis was its crown jewel, a world draped in hues no human eye could naturally perceive. Its skies glowed with shifting colors, as though painted by an artist who couldn't decide between sunrise and sunset. Towering crystalline spires reached for the heavens, refracting light into rainbows that danced across vast plains of iridescent grass. It was beautiful, but it wasn't safe. Xyraxis was home to the Xyran Empire, ruled by Queen Lyria, an alien monarch whose very presence commanded awe and fear in equal measure. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her form both terrifying and mesmerizing. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver under the twin suns, and her eyes burned with an otherworldly violet flame that seemed capable of piercing through souls. Around her neck hung a necklace made from shards of starlight, said to hold unimaginable power. Her voice, when she chose to speak, carried the weight of thunderstorms and symphonies combined. No one dared approach her, not even her own counselors, without invitation or cause. And yet, despite her regal bearing and undeniable beauty, whispers about her circulated among the Empire's citizens. Tales of her wrath, stories of those who had crossed her path only to vanish without a trace. Her palace loomed at the heart of the capital city, a fortress of obsidian and diamond-like material that reflected everything around it, making it appear almost alive. Guards clad in sleek armor patrolled its halls, their weapons humming with energy. Inside, servants moved silently, avoiding eye contact with anyone above their station. At the center of it all sat Queen Lyria on her throne, surrounded by advisors who spoke in hushed tones, careful not to provoke her ire. They called her the Unapproachable, not just because of her imposing stature but also because of the aura of danger that clung to her like a second skin. Yet, amidst this grandeur and terror, something odd began to stir. A human soldier, part of a reconnaissance mission sent by Earth's military forces after detecting strange signals emanating from Xyraxis, found himself stranded on the planet after his ship malfunctioned during entry. This soldier, let's call him Arlen, was unlike any hero you'd expect. He wasn't particularly brave, nor did he have aspirations of glory. If anything, he was clumsy, often tripping over his own boots, and prone to blurting out things he immediately regretted. But fate has a way of finding people when they least expect it, and Arlen's moment came sooner than he would have liked. Lost and desperate, Arlen stumbled into the outskirts of the capital city, unaware of the storm brewing within its walls. Little did he know that his accidental intrusion into Xyran territory, and eventually into the orbit of Queen Lyria herself, would set off a chain reaction neither species could have anticipated. For now, though, he simply wandered, hungry, exhausted, and utterly clueless about what lay ahead. Arlen didn't exactly plan to end up face-to-face with the most feared being in 2 galaxies. In fact, if given the choice, he'd probably have preferred hiding behind a rock somewhere until reinforcements arrived, or at least until he figured out how to fix his busted communicator. But life rarely gives anyone such luxuries, especially not soldiers who seem magnetically drawn to trouble. So here he was, stumbling through the glittering streets of Xyraxis' capital city, trying and failing to blend in while simultaneously marveling at the sheer strangeness of it all. He'd managed to scavenge some scraps of fabric from a market stall earlier, wrapping them around his uniform in what he hoped was a convincing disguise. Unfortunately, the result looked less like camouflage and more like someone had tried to dress a scarecrow using shiny curtains. To make matters worse, every step he took seemed to attract attention, whether it was the wide-eyed stares of locals or the suspicious glances of armed guards stationed along the street. One particularly curious child even poked him with a stick before running away giggling, leaving Arlen wondering whether pretending to be invisible might actually work better than his current strategy. Eventually, hunger got the better of him. Spotting what appeared to be a food vendor nearby, Arlen approached cautiously, clutching a few shiny coins he'd swiped earlier from a discarded purse. The vendor, a squat creature with too many limbs and glowing green eyes, eyed him warily but accepted the payment without comment, handing over a steaming plate of something vaguely resembling noodles. Arlen thanked the vendor awkwardly, unsure whether nodding vigorously counted as polite behavior in this culture. Either way, it worked. The vendor turned back to serving other customers, leaving Arlen free to devour the meal standing up. It was mid-bite that disaster struck, or maybe opportunity depending on how you looked at it. While chewing enthusiastically and attempting to avoid spilling sauce down his makeshift cloak, Arlen failed to notice the growing commotion behind him. A procession of guards marched down the street, clearing a path for someone or something important. Curious onlookers pressed against buildings to get out of the way, whispering excitedly amongst themselves. Arlen, oblivious as ever, kept eating until he felt a sharp tap on his shoulder. Turning around, he came face to face with one of the guards, towering over him with an expression that suggested extreme disapproval of noodle consumption during royal parades. Before Arlen could apologize or possibly offer the guard a bite, another figure stepped forward, Queen Lyria herself. She moved gracefully despite her height, her shimmering gown trailing behind her like liquid moonlight. Her violet eyes locked onto Arlen, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. And then, predictably, Arlen opened his mouth. "Oh, wow," he blurted, noodles dangling precariously from his lips. "You're, really tall." Silence fell over the crowd. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Arlen froze, realizing too late that perhaps complimenting an alien queen's height wasn't the wisest move. But instead of incinerating him on the spot, Lyria tilted her head slightly, studying him with an unreadable expression. Then, to everyone's astonishment, including Arlen's, she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, Peresi, more like the kind of smirk a cat might give before deciding whether to play with a mouse or eat it. Still, it was a smile, and coming from someone who hadn't been seen smiling in decades, it sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. Whispers erupted instantly, a cacophony of voices speculating about what this bizarre interaction could mean. Some believed it was a trick, a cruel prelude to some terrible punishment. Others whispered conspiratorially that perhaps the human had unknowingly triggered some ancient Zyran ritual. Whatever the reason, no one dared move closer, leaving Arlen standing alone in the middle of the street, noodles still dangling awkwardly from his mouth. For her part, Queen Lyria didn't immediately order Arlen's execution or summon her guards to drag him away. Instead, she continued to regard him with that same enigmatic expression, her violet eyes flickering with something akin to curiosity. Finally, she spoke, her voice resonating like distant thunder rolling across open plains. "You are unafraid?" she asked, the question phrased more like a statement. Arlen swallowed hard, the noodles finally disappearing down his throat. No," he replied honestly, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm actually pretty terrified right now." This response elicited another ripple of murmurs from the crowd, though none dared laugh outright. Fear of offending the queen outweighed even amusement at the human's apparent idiocy. Lyria, however, raised an elegant eyebrow, her lips quirking upward ever so slightly again. "Most beings tremble in my presence," she observed, her tone almost conversational. "Even my own subjects avoid meeting my gaze. Yet you?" She paused, tilting her head as though inspecting a particularly interesting specimen. "You stand here, speaking freely, wearing garments that resemble rejected drapery." If possible, Arlen turned even redder. "Yeah, about that," he stammered, tugging self-consciously at the makeshift cloak. "Fashion isn't really my thing. Neither is blending in, apparently." To his immense relief and confusion, Lyria laughed. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a soft, melodic chuckle that seemed to ripple outward, causing several nearby guards to stiffen visibly. Clearly, they weren't used to hearing their queen express anything resembling mirth. Encouraged by this unexpected development, Arlen decided to press his luck. "So, does this mean I'm not dead yet?" The queen's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of mild contemplation. "No," she said slowly, "you are not dead. At least not today." She stepped closer, her towering frame casting a shadow over him. "Tell me, human, why are you here? You do not belong on Zyraxis." "Well, technically, I crashed here," Arlen admitted, scratching the back of his neck nervously. "My ship sort of broke. Long story short, I'm lost, hungry, and completely out of my depth. Also, I think your guards might hate me." "They do," Lyria confirmed matter-of-factly. "But hatred is irrelevant. What intrigues me is your audacity." She leaned down slightly, bringing her glowing eyes level with his. "Do you understand who I am?" Yeah," Arlen replied, squirming under her intense gaze. "You're the queen, right? The scary one everyone talks about? No offense." "None taken," she said dryly, straightening up again. "And yet, you address me as though I am merely another traveler you've encountered in your wanderings." "That's because I don't know any better," Arlen admitted sheepishly. "Back where I come from, we don't really have queens like you. Well, except maybe in old movies. Usually, they're played by actresses who aren't nearly as intimidating. Lyria regarded him for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. Then, to Arlen's astonishment, she gestured for her entourage to continue moving, waving off the guards who had begun closing in on him. "Come," she commanded, turning back toward her palace. "You will join me." "What?" Arlen sputtered, nearly choking on his own words. "Wait, seriously? You want me to go with you? To your palace? Where all the pointy weapons are?" "You misunderstand," Lyria said without looking back. "You have no choice." And with that, she strode away, her entourage following obediently. Left with no alternative, Arlen hesitated for a split second before jogging after her, muttering under his breath about how nothing in his training manual had prepared him for this. The journey to the palace was surreal, to say the least. As they wove through the crowded streets, the throng of onlookers parted like waves before a storm, their eyes wide with disbelief. Arlen couldn't help but feel like he'd somehow become the main attraction in a cosmic circus, a clumsy human clown escorted by the galaxy's most fearsome queen. Every so often, someone would whisper loudly enough for him to hear, "Is that really happening?" Or, "Did she just smile at him?" It was surreal, disorienting, and more than a little terrifying. When they finally reached the palace gates, Arlen couldn't suppress a low whistle. Up close, the structure was even more imposing, its obsidian walls gleaming ominously under the twin suns. Towering statues of Zyran warriors flanked the entrance, their stone faces frozen in expressions of eternal vigilance. Beyond the gates stretched a labyrinth of corridors lined with intricate carvings that shimmered faintly, as though imbued with latent energy. The air inside was cool and carried a faint metallic tang, making Arlen's skin prickle uncomfortably. Lyria led him deeper into the palace, her stride purposeful and unhurried. Servants and guards scrambled out of her way, bowing deeply as she passed. Arlen followed awkwardly, feeling increasingly out of place among the opulence. His borrowed cloak snagged on a decorative spike jutting from a wall, prompting a servant to rush forward and untangle it with trembling hands. "Thanks," Arlen muttered, offering what he hoped was a reassuring smile. The servant blinked once, then scurried away without responding. Eventually, they arrived at what appeared to be the throne room. Unlike the rest of the palace, which exuded cold grandeur, this chamber radiated warmth. Golden light spilled from glowing orbs suspended in the air, illuminating a massive throne carved from what looked like solid crystal. Intricate patterns swirled across its surface, pulsing softly as though alive. Surrounding the throne were holographic displays showing various parts of the empire, each image flickering with data streams too complex for Arlen to decipher. Lyria ascended the dais and seated herself upon the throne with practiced ease. Once settled, she gestured for Arlen to approach. He did so reluctantly, stopping just short of the base of the dais. "So," he began, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "What exactly happens now?" "That depends," Lyria replied, resting her chin on one hand. "On you." "On me," Arlen echoed, blinking in confusion. "What did I do?" "It is not what you have done," she explained, her tone thoughtful. "It is what you represent. Humans are curious creatures. Your kind possesses a peculiar combination of recklessness and resilience. Tell me, human, what drives your species to explore the unknown, knowing full well the dangers that await?" Arlen hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Well, I guess it's because we're curious. We always want to know what's out there, even if it scares us. Maybe especially because it scares us." Lyria nodded slowly, as though considering his answer. "Curiosity can be both a strength and a weakness," she mused. "It leads to discovery, yes, but also to destruction. My people learned that lesson long ago. That is why we remain isolated, content to rule our corner of the galaxy without interference." "But doesn't that get boring?" Arlen blurted before he could stop himself. Realizing his mistake, he winced. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "No," Lyria interrupted, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "Do not apologize. Your honesty is refreshing, if reckless. Boredom, as you call it, is a small price to pay for stability. However," she trailed off, her gaze drifting to the holographic displays surrounding them, "perhaps there is value in seeing the universe through different eyes." Before Arlen could respond, the ground beneath them trembled violently. Alarms blared throughout the palace, red lights flashing urgently. Lyria rose swiftly from her throne, her expression hardening. "Stay here," she ordered, descending the dais with fluid grace. "Guards!" Arlen watched as chaos erupted around him. Servants fled in panic, while armored figures rushed past, weapons drawn. Through the open doors of the throne room, he glimpsed flashes of light and heard the unmistakable sound of explosions. Whatever was happening, it was big, and judging by the sudden tension in the air, it wasn't good. Ignoring Lyria's command, Arlen edged closer to the doorway, peering outside. In the distance, he saw ships descending from the sky, their hulls emblazoned with unfamiliar symbols. They fired indiscriminately, striking buildings and scattering debris. The invaders moved with precision, their forces overwhelming the Zyran defenses. Panic gripped Arlen's chest, but alongside it came a spark of determination. He might not have been trained for this, but he wasn't about to stand idly by while the woman who had spared his life fought for hers. Summoning every ounce of courage he possessed, Arlen grabbed a fallen guard's weapon and ran toward the fray, shouting, "Hey, ugly! Over here!" The battle raging outside the palace was nothing short of apocalyptic. Explosions tore through the crystalline spires, sending shards of glass-like material cascading to the ground like deadly rain. The air crackled with energy as beams of light crisscrossed the skies, illuminating the invaders' ships as they hovered menacingly above the city. Their design was sleek and predatory, with jagged edges that seemed to slice through the atmosphere itself. On board, humanoid figures moved with mechanical efficiency, their weapons firing relentlessly at anything that moved. Arlen skidded to a halt behind a toppled statue, clutching the alien weapon tightly. It hummed in his hands, unfamiliar but surprisingly responsive. He peeked around the edge of the rubble, scanning the chaos for any sign of Lyria. She was easy to spot, her shimmering form cutting through the battlefield like a blade, her movements graceful yet lethal. Guards flanked her, forming a protective barrier as she directed counterattacks against the invaders. Despite her commanding presence, Arlen could see the strain in her expression. These weren't ordinary enemies. They were organized, relentless, and clearly intent on destroying everything in their path. Taking a deep breath, Arlen aimed the weapon at one of the closest ships hovering overhead. His first shot went wide, missing the target entirely and earning him a startled glance from a nearby Zyran soldier. "Sorry," he shouted, adjusting his grip. The second shot hit its mark, striking the ship's underbelly and causing it to wobble precariously. Encouraged, Arlen fired again, this time hitting one of the thrusters. The ship spiraled downward, crashing into a nearby building with a deafening roar. "Not bad for a rookie," he muttered to himself, grinning despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But his moment of triumph was short-lived. A group of invaders descended from another ship, their armored suits gleaming menacingly in the dim light. They advanced steadily, their weapons trained on Arlen's position. Heart pounding, he ducked back behind cover just as a barrage of laser fire scorched the air above him. "This might have been a bad idea," he muttered, fumbling for another charge in the weapons magazine. Peering cautiously around the statue, he spotted one of the invaders aiming directly at him. Time seemed to slow as Arlen realized he wouldn't be able to dodge in time. Just as the invader fired, a blinding flash of violet light intercepted the beam, deflecting it harmlessly into the sky. Arlen blinked, momentarily stunned. Standing a few feet away was Lyria, her arms outstretched and her eyes blazing brighter than ever. The starlight necklace around her neck pulsed with an intense glow, seemingly channeling her power. With a single gesture, she unleashed a wave of energy that sent the invaders flying backward, their weapons clattering uselessly to the ground. "Get up," she commanded, her voice cutting through the din like a knife. "We cannot afford hesitation." Arlen scrambled to his feet, gripping the weapon tighter. "Got it," he said, nodding quickly. Together, they moved forward, Lyria leading the charge while Arlen provided covering fire. Their unlikely partnership proved surprisingly effective. Where Lyria's precise blasts dismantled entire squads of invaders, Arlen's erratic shooting created enough chaos to keep them off balance. Slowly but surely, they pushed the invaders back, reclaiming sections of the city block by block. As they fought side by side, Arlen couldn't help but notice how Lyria's demeanor had shifted. Gone was the aloof, calculating queen who had interrogated him in the throne room. In her place stood a warrior, fierce and unyielding, driven by a protectiveness that bordered on ferocity. It was as if the attack had awakened something primal within her, a side of her personality that few, if any, had ever witnessed. At one point, as they took shelter behind a crumbling wall, Arlen glanced at her and grinned. "You're kind of badass, you know that?" Lyria arched an eyebrow, though there was a flicker of amusement in her violet eyes. "Do not mistake necessity for admiration, human." "Fair enough," Arlen replied, reloading his weapon. "But seriously, thanks for saving my butt back there." She didn't respond immediately, instead focusing on the next wave of invaders advancing toward them. When she finally spoke, her tone was softer, almost reflective. "You saved mine first," she said quietly. "By drawing their fire. Foolish, yes, but effective." Arlen chuckled nervously. "Yeah, well, I figured it was worth a shot." Literally. Their brief exchange was interrupted by a deafening boom as another ship crashed nearby, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Lyria turned sharply, her expression grim. "We must reach the central spire," she said urgently. "They are targeting the core of the city, the heart of Xyraxis. If they succeed, the entire planet will fall." Without waiting for a response, she surged forward, her movements faster and more determined than before. Arlen followed closely, his earlier confidence wavering as the stakes became painfully clear. This wasn't just a skirmish. It was an existential threat, one that required everything they had to overcome. As they neared the central spire, the resistance grew fiercer. Invaders poured in from all directions, their numbers seemingly endless. Lyria's powers, though formidable, couldn't hold them all back indefinitely. Arlen found himself fighting harder than ever, his muscles burning with exertion as he fired shot after shot, each blast fueled by sheer desperation. For every invader they defeated, two more seemed to take their place. Finally, they reached the base of the spire, a towering structure encased in translucent material that pulsed faintly with inner light. The invaders had already breached its outer defenses, their weapons carving deep gouges into the pristine surface. Lyria hesitated for a fraction of a second, her gaze fixed on the damage. Then, with a resolute expression, she turned to Arlen. "You must trust me," she said firmly. "Follow my lead, and do not falter." "Trust you," Arlen repeated, raising an eyebrow despite the gravity of the situation. "Lady, you haven't given me much reason to not trust you so far." Her lips twitched briefly, though whether in annoyance or amusement, Arlen couldn't tell. "Then let us hope that continues," she replied cryptically. With that, she activated the starlight necklace, its glow intensifying until it illuminated the entire area. The invaders paused, momentarily blinded by the brilliance. Seizing the opportunity, Lyria sprinted toward the spire, weaving through the chaos with impossible speed. Arlen followed as best he could, dodging incoming fire and returning shots whenever possible. As they entered the spire, the interior revealed itself to be a maze of glowing pathways and floating platforms, each step echoing ominously in the cavernous space. The invaders pursued relentlessly, their footsteps reverberating like thunder. Lyria led them higher, ascending spiral staircases and leaping across gaps that made Arlen's stomach lurch. At last, they reached the apex of the spire, a circular chamber bathed in radiant light. At its center floated a massive crystal, its facets refracting beams of energy that seemed to sustain the entire city. The invaders burst in moments later, surrounding them on all sides. Trapped, Arlen tightened his grip on the weapon, bracing for what might be his final stand. Lyria stepped forward, her voice ringing out with authority. "Enough," she declared, raising her hands. The crystal responded, its light flaring brightly. "This ends now." The invaders hesitated, uncertainty flickering across their masked faces. And then, without warning, the chamber erupted in a dazzling display of power, forcing everyone, including Arlen, to shield their eyes. When the light finally dimmed, the outcome remained uncertain, the fate of Xyraxis hanging precariously in the balance. As the light dimmed, Arlen blinked furiously, trying to adjust his vision. The chamber was eerily silent now, save for the faint hum of energy emanating from the central crystal. The invaders lay sprawled on the ground, their weapons deactivated and their suits sparking faintly as if short-circuited by some unseen force. Lyria stood at the heart of it all, her arms lowered but still glowing faintly with residual power. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, evidence of the immense effort it had taken to channel such raw energy. Arlen hesitated, unsure whether to approach or stay put. Finally, he stepped forward cautiously, his weapon dangling loosely in his hand. Did we win? He asked, his voice tentative. Lyria turned to him, her violet eyes softening slightly despite the exhaustion etched on her face. For now, she replied, her tone measured. But this is not over. They will regroup and next time. She trailed off, glancing at the crystal behind her. Its glow had dimmed noticeably, pulsing weakly as though struggling to maintain its function. Next time, I may not be able to protect us. Arlen frowned, looking between her and the crystal. What does that thing even do? Besides being really shiny, it sustains Zyraxis, Lyria explained, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. It is the source of our planet's life force, the reason our skies shimmer, our fields bloom, and our people thrive. Without it, everything would collapse into darkness. Great, Arlen muttered under his breath. So basically, we're guarding the universe's biggest battery pack. Lyria shot him a sharp look, though there was no real anger behind it. Do not trivialize what you do not understand, human. Sorry, Arlen said quickly, raising his hands in mock surrender. Just trying to lighten the mood. Since we almost got vaporized like 5 minutes ago. To his surprise, Lyria let out a small sigh, almost a laugh, and shook her head. You are infuriatingly persistent. I prefer charmingly determined, Arlen quipped, grinning despite himself. Then, more seriously, he added, Look, I get it. This place means everything to you. And yeah, I don't belong here, but I'm not just going to stand around while someone tries to destroy your home. Not after everything you've done for me. Lyria studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded once. Very well. But know this, if we fail, it will cost you far more than your life. Noted, Arlen said, swallowing hard. He glanced back at the crystal. So, any ideas? Or are we just winging it? For the first time since they'd met, Lyria smiled. Not the amused smirk she'd given him earlier, but a genuine, albeit fleeting, smile. Perhaps a bit of both, she admitted. Come, we must reinforce the spire's defenses before they return. Over the next several hours, Arlen found himself working alongside Lyria in ways he never could have imagined. Under her guidance, he helped reroute energy conduits, repair damaged systems, and set up traps using whatever scraps of alien tech they could salvage from the invaders' fallen ships. It wasn't glamorous work. In fact, it involved a lot of crawling through tight spaces, fumbling with tools he didn't recognize, and narrowly avoiding electrocuting himself. But it gave him a sense of purpose. More importantly, it brought him closer to Lyria. At first, their interactions were purely functional. Terse instructions followed by brief acknowledgments. But as the hours dragged on, cracks began to form in Lyria's stoic exterior. She started offering explanations instead of commands, sharing snippets about Zyraxis' history and the significance of the spire. Arlen listened intently, asking questions that often caught her off guard. You humans are obsessed with stories, she remarked at one point, handing him a glowing orb to attach to a conduit. Why? Well, stories connect us, Arlen replied, fumbling with the orb before finally slotting it into place. They remind us where we come from and give us hope for where we're going. Plus, they make boring stuff sound cool. Lyria raised an eyebrow. Boring? This is hardly boring. Oh, sure. Defending an entire planet against intergalactic bad guys sounds thrilling, Arlen teased, wiping sweat from his brow. But let's be honest. Most of this is duct tape and crossed fingers. To his delight, Lyria chuckled softly. Duct tape? It's a human thing, Arlen explained, waving a hand dismissively. Trust me, it fixes everything. Their banter became a kind of rhythm, a way to ease the tension as they worked tirelessly to fortify the spire. Slowly but surely, Arlen noticed subtle changes in Lyria's demeanor. She laughed more often, quietly, almost shyly, and occasionally allowed herself moments of vulnerability. Once, when they paused to rest, she admitted how isolating it had been to rule alone, surrounded by fear rather than trust. I am queen, she said softly, staring out at the city below. And yet, I have no one to confide in. No one who sees me as anything other than untouchable. Arlen hesitated, then placed a tentative hand on her shoulder. Maybe that's because you haven't given them a chance to see otherwise. She looked at him sharply, her violet eyes searching his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly she nodded. Perhaps you are right. By the time reinforcements arrived, Zyran soldiers dispatched from neighboring regions to aid in the defense. The spire was nearly impenetrable. Traps lined every entrance. Energy shields reinforced the walls, and the crystal itself pulsed steadily, bolstered by the repairs they'd made. As Lyria addressed her troops, Arlen stood slightly apart, watching her with newfound admiration. She was every bit the commanding figurehead her people needed, but to him she was also something else. A partner, an ally, and maybe, just maybe, a friend. When the meeting ended, Lyria approached him, her expression thoughtful. "Your ingenuity has proven invaluable," she said, her tone formal but warm. "I underestimated you, human." "Name's Arlen," he reminded her, grinning. "And hey, I've been underestimated my whole life. Makes me kinda proud when I prove people wrong." Lyria tilted her head, studying him. "Arlen?" she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Thank you." He shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "Hey, don't mention it. Saving planets is kinda becoming my thing." Her lips twitched upward, and for a moment, it seemed like she might say something more. Instead, she gestured toward the horizon, where the invaders' ships were beginning to gather once again. "Prepare yourself," she said. "This battle will decide the fate of Xyraxis." Arlen squared his shoulders, determination replacing the playful grin on his face. "Then let's make sure it ends the right way." Together, they turned to face the coming storm, their bond stronger than ever. Whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. The battle that followed was nothing short of legendary. The invaders returned with renewed ferocity, their ships blotting out the twin suns as they descended upon the spire like vultures circling prey. This time, however, Xyraxis wasn't caught off guard. Lyria's leadership had galvanized her people, uniting them under a single purpose, protecting their home at all costs. And at the heart of it all stood Arlen, a human soldier who had somehow become an unlikely hero. As the first wave of attackers breached the spire's defenses, Lyria unleashed the full extent of her powers. Her starlight necklace blazed brighter than ever before, casting beams of energy that sliced through enemy lines with surgical precision. Around her, Xyran soldiers fought valiantly, bolstered by her presence. But even she couldn't be everywhere at once, and that's where Arlen stepped in. Armed with a jury-rigged weapon he'd cobbled together from scavenged parts, Arlen darted between cover points, picking off enemies with surprising accuracy. His unorthodox tactics, throwing makeshift grenades made from alien tech, setting off traps at just the right moment, kept the invaders guessing. More than once, he shouted absurd encouragements to the Xyran troops, earning bemused looks but also boosting morale. At one point, when a group of invaders managed to flank Lyria, Arlen charged in without hesitation. "Hey, ugly!" he yelled, drawing their fire. "Over here!" He dove behind a shattered pillar, narrowly avoiding a blast that left scorch marks on the wall behind him. Before the invaders could recover, Lyria appeared, her violet eyes blazing as she unleashed a pulse of energy that sent them sprawling. "Must you always draw attention to yourself?" she asked, though there was no real bite in her voice. "It works, doesn't it?" Arlen shot back, grinning despite the chaos around them. "Besides, can't have my favorite queen getting hurt." Lyria raised an eyebrow, though a faint smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Favorite queen? Well, you're the only queen I know," Arlen admitted, ducking as another explosion rocked the chamber. "But if there were others, you'd definitely still be my favorite." Before Lyria could respond, the ground trembled violently as one of the invaders' ships crashed into the side of the spire. Debris rained down, forcing them to retreat deeper into the structure. As they regrouped, Arlen noticed how weary Lyria looked. Her movements were slower now, her breathing labored. Whatever power she wielded came at a cost, one she was clearly paying dearly. "You need to rest," Arlen said firmly, stepping closer. "You're no good to anyone if you burn yourself out." "I cannot afford to rest," Lyria replied sharply, though her voice softened when she saw the concern in his eyes. "Not until this is over." "Then let me help," Arlen insisted. "I'm not just here to crack jokes and blow stuff up, you know? Tell me what to do." For a long moment, Lyria hesitated. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. "Very well. There is a control panel near the crystal. It regulates the flow of energy. If you can stabilize it, the spire's defenses will hold longer." "Got it," Arlen said, already sprinting toward the glowing console. Dodging falling debris and enemy fire, he reached the panel and began fiddling with the controls. To his relief, some of the symbols matched those he'd seen earlier, giving him a rough idea of what to press. Sparks flew as he worked, his hands moving frantically as alarms blared around him. Meanwhile, Lyria faced the invaders head-on, her every movement fueled by sheer determination. She fought not just for herself or her people, but for the man who had somehow become more than just an ally. Arlen's unwavering loyalty, his refusal to give up even when the odds seemed insurmountable, had awakened something within her. For centuries, she had ruled alone, burdened by the weight of responsibility. Now, for the first time, she felt less alone. When Arlen finally stabilized the energy flow, the spire responded with a surge of light that rippled outward, creating a protective barrier around the structure. The invaders recoiled, their weapons unable to penetrate the shield. One by one, their ships withdrew, retreating into the sky like shadows fleeing the dawn. The victory was hard-won, but it came at a price. Exhausted, Lyria collapsed to her knees, the glow of her necklace fading as her strength waned. Arlen was at her side in an instant, steadying her with a gentle hand. "You did it," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. "You saved everyone." "No," Lyria corrected, looking up at him with tired but grateful eyes. "We did." In the days that followed, Zyraxis began to heal. The damage inflicted by the invaders was extensive, but the resilience of its people shone brighter than ever. Lyria, too, began to change, not just in how she ruled, but in how she connected with those around her. Inspired by Arlen's courage and compassion, she started reaching out to her subjects, listening to their concerns and sharing in their struggles. Slowly, the fear that had once defined her reign began to fade, replaced by trust and admiration. As for Arlen, he found himself welcomed into the Zyran community in ways he never expected. Though he still didn't fully understand their customs and often stumbled over formalities, his sincerity won hearts wherever he went. Children giggled whenever he passed, pointing out his clumsy attempts to mimic Zyran greetings. Adults thanked him for his role in saving their planet, though many teased him about his peculiar methods. Through it all, his bond with Lyria deepened. They spent hours talking late into the night, discussing everything from the intricacies of Zyran politics to the quirks of human culture. Arlen introduced her to Earth music, playing melodies on a battered handheld device he'd salvaged from his ship. Lyria listened intently, her expression softening as she hummed along. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens bathed in the light of the twin moons, Lyria turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Tell me, Arlen," she said, her voice unusually hesitant. "What will you do now? Will you return to your world?" Arlen stopped, considering the question. "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "Earth feels distant now, like it belongs to someone else. But staying here," he glanced at her, his smile tinged with uncertainty, "wouldn't exactly be simple, would it?" "No," Lyria agreed, her gaze steady. "It would not. But perhaps simplicity is overrated." Arlen chuckled, shaking his head. "You really are something else, you know that?" "As are you," Lyria replied, her tone softening. "You have changed me, Arlen, in ways I never thought possible." "And you've changed me," Arlen said sincerely. "I came here lost, scared, and completely out of my depth. But because of you, I found a purpose, a reason to keep going." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them comfortable and profound. Finally, Lyria reached out, taking his hand in hers. Her touch was warm, grounding, a reminder of how far they'd come together. Whatever the future held, whether it involved ruling a planet, raising a family, or simply navigating the complexities of two vastly different worlds, they would face it side by side. For now, that was enough.